Welcome to another edition of the Crotchety Old Men podcast, where this one's no different than the others, where we're going to provide information, education, exposure, and opportunity. And as we do every week, I've got my co-host PC. PC, how you doing today?
Hey. Everything's everything. I'm doing just fine and twice if I like it. How you doing, George? Everything okay with you?
Oh yeah, I'm doing good, man. Like everybody else, trying to stay warm.
That's great. Yeah, because it's cold outside everywhere. And if
Yeah.
and if it's not cold, you're in part of the country where it's burning up. And I mean that literally.
Literally,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but we got it in our studio today, George. We've got the comeback kids. We've got Tony Owens and Reggie Beaty. They represent the Foundation for Educational Success. And we had such a success with them in our podcast. We've invited them back to talk about some new projects that they're conducting at this particular time. And we also want to talk a little bit about DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, fellas, how you doing today?
Oh, terrific,
Awesome.
terrific, Paul. I'm doing great. Good to be back with you all.
Awesome.
Check that out. Last time we talked, we were talking primarily about your foundation and the things that you were doing in the Atlanta area. And if you would, just for our audience sake, kind of tell us a little bit about the foundation.
I'll let you take that, Red.
Um, First of all, thank you, George and Paul. Appreciate the opportunity as always to be here with you. But in summary, we've grown since the last time we were on. I think we were on about 3 years ago. How long has it been? About three?
It's
We were on a year ago. It was February 20. No, actually, I'm sorry. It was February 2023. So yeah, it was
2023. Okay.
2 years ago.
so,
Yeah,
so, so
Two
actually.
yeah,
years
almost 2 years
ago.
ago.
So since 2 years ago, our primary work has been to work within school systems to create what we call high performing culture and climates. And as a result of that work, training principals and teachers and others, it's just like any other business. Paul talked about the Atlanta area. We actually have been working around the country for the last 18 years. And essentially, I guess in terms of growth, we help educators create high performing culture and climate. If you show me an institution, whether it's a business, a school, if the culture and climate isn't right, then regardless of what you're selling and what you're teaching, the environment is not going to be, in our case, conducive to learning. We also work within the juvenile justice system. And I would just tell you, and I know we're going to go there, but one of the things that Tony and I found out is primarily as a result of our work over the last 18 years, we can create the right environments, get kids to do what they're supposed to do, educators to do what they're supposed to do. But we found out a lot of our kids cannot read. And that's really earth shattering to Tony and I. And I'll turn it over to Tony and turn it back over to you guys because you asked me about where we've been. That's the work we've been doing the last 18 years. And now we're focused on primarily black boys. Our boys can't read. And so that's been the evolution of our organization. So I'll just stop right there. Maybe we're slow to the game. I don't know, but that's just one of the things, a lesson learned that we found out. And I'll summarize that because I know that's just journal saying our boys can't read, but I'll give you some statistical data to back that up on why we say our boys can't read.
Yeah, just so we kind of stay right there for those that may not have listened to our first podcast. And I definitely encourage them to go back and listen at it because it gives a deeper background of, what you guys are doing, how long you've been doing. And before we go any further, I want to thank both of you guys for your service because I think that goes that's sometimes overlooked, the sacrifice that you guys have made in your life to, serve in the military. I think that's so important. So definitely want to thank you guys for your service. So as we talk about your program, can you kind of give us an overview of what the curriculum actually looks like, for an individual coming into your program, or what you would be presenting to an existing institution that has solicited your assistance?
Yeah, George, just to give you a reference of how we start our work, first thing we do when we partner with a school or a district, we tell them first thing we want to do is come in and give you an assessment of your coaching climate. That's when we take a team of people in and we go in and spend an entire day at the school, and we just get a snapshot of what goes on in that school from the time that the first bus gets there until the last after school activity happens. What are your standard operating procedures? Are people in place? What are the temperaments of the people that are in place? How are kids talking to teachers? How are teachers talking to kids? How are teachers talking to each other? And so then we go and look at the cleanliness. We walk through the entire building, do what we call a white glove inspection, where we're trying to find out, are you keeping this building the way that you keep your home? If not, what makes a kid want to come to this school? What makes a staff member want to come to this school? And once we do that, we give you what we call a culture and climate profile rating. Now you can go in and see whether you're beginning, advanced, or intermediate. And we tell you from there, we'll create a blueprint for what needs to happen next by way of staff development, by way of some of the things that need to happen in training with your parents, with your students, with your staff on how do we create this high performing coaching climate. We say the coaching climate has to be right for learning to take place. So after we do that, now we're in on a regular basis assessing, going back in, giving additional staff development, giving different training, giving different information back and forth to the principal, because a lot of times we say, and one of the things that Reggie and I, we've learned, I hate to use this term, but Crotchety Old Men, I think it's okay. You can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Watch
So
yourself. Watch yourself now.
we bagged it to saying that we really like working with new first year at the oldest is a second year principal, because they hadn't got caught in their ways. They hadn't got stuck in their ways. They're open to new ideas. They see new things that older principals don't. And they say, okay, I never thought about doing that. That's one of the best aha moments that Reggie and I have when we're working with the principal. They'd be like, I would have never went through this process on my own, because they give people these principal positions and they assume they didn't know how to lead because they were great teachers in most cases. Just because you were a great teacher, that doesn't make you a great principal.
Now,
That's Go ahead,
one
Paul.
of the things, Tony, that fascinates me about you brothers, and for the sake of our audience, these brothers do not have an education background. So tell me just a little bit about how you got into this in the first place, and so deeply considering the fact that you haven't had an educational background.
Well, I won't tell Reggie's story. His is very interesting, but mine is kind of funny. It was kind of because it was a calling for me. I was doing some other work, doing some other things, actually working at Rich's department store in Greenbrier Mall as a store detective. And one young lady noticed how I was working, because you had to walk up to people and arrest them and do things. She said, Tony, why you don't never have no argument with anybody that you ever lock up? I said, because everybody in this store work for me. The person don't know it or not. I say, either you can go down quietly with me, or I can get everybody else to come over and we can bum rush. And they said, which way to go? so from there, she said, you figured out how to either trick people or have a relationship with people to get them to understand that it'll be in their best interest to move in that direction. So I was then invited to come to an interview at this place. At the time, it was known as Exodus. We can talk more about it if you want to, and you'll see how that leads to me and Reggie actually being together now. And it later on became communities and schools, one of the nation's largest dropout prevention networks. And I worked with them for over 25 years before Reggie and I decided to go at it on our own. So for me, it was happenstance. It was one of the things that I love doing. It was a calling, and that's how I've been in the business now for over 35 years.
That is amazing. Reggie, what's your story, brother?
Well, just real briefly, I grew up in the Atlanta area at one time. I'm not sure you all are familiar with a community called Bankhead Court. And in 1974, it was featured as one of the worst neighborhoods in the country.
On 60 Minutes.
On 60 Minutes. And as a result of growing up in that community, it wasn't my cognitive ability. Poor people sometimes make bad decisions. Good people sometimes do bad things. And so I was expelled in high school in the 9th grade. And so I was in the streets for 2 years as a teenager, hustling, doing all the crazy things that a lot of teenagers who are not in school are doing. But as a result of that, uh, this organization that Tony talked about he worked for, it actually saved my life. And as a result of them coming back, and I only been to 1 year of high school. Obviously, I've graduated from college, master's degree, and et cetera, but 1 year of high school because this organization, I took the GED, got me out of the streets from carrying guns, burglarizing, stealing, robbing folks. I've been locked up 3 times as a juvenile. But somebody like the guys on this call, one man saved my life and caused me to change it on that trajectory. So as a result of that, he got me in school to a college and graduated and so on. And I retired as a lieutenant colonel from the Army. I was promotable to colonel and made a decision to get out to come and try to help save more of the young men lives who were on that plight that I was on, but not going on that trajectory to come in this other trajectory. And as a result, I was selected as the best instructor in the nation for all colleges and university. And Tony and I linked up in this organization, and it just got me on this path of what I'm really passionate about, and that is education. People think differently about education. They think it's traditional math, teaching, math, science, social studies, etc. But all of us need to look at ourselves as educators for young people. And so Tony and I decided to join forces and create this foundation about 20 years ago.
That's amazing, and I truly appreciate you, brothers' service as well. Tell us, tell us a little bit about how you connect with the schools and what exactly is it that they're looking for out of you guys.
Well, if I were to tackle that, Paul, I would say guidance. Most schools don't understand that there is a science to culture and climate, as opposed to just something that happens or some touch of feeling thing that you don't know how to control it. Me and Reggie have come up with a process that says these are the things you have to do to create this thing called culture and climate. So we work with the schools that are interested. And one of the things that we've come to find out, all schools are not interested in change. They're okay with just going through the motion. You know, you got to have a principal that's ready and adamant about, I want to change. I want to see different things happen in this school, regardless of the community that it's in. I think I can do different things in this school building. So once we get a principal like that gravitates to the work and they know that it can be done and they understand the process and they'll follow it step by step, those are the places that we like being in. So when you look at doing this work, it's not everybody that we can work with. And we make a choice not to work with everybody. And we've actually probably been kicked out of more school districts than we work with because we give them the uncut truth. We tell them these are the things that we saw, and we can't sugarcoat it, because if you're going to fix it, you got to know this is what we saw from the outside looking in. When we walked in your building, we felt like there was no teaching and learning going on. And unfortunately, we've been doing this long enough that we go through the process, but we can walk in a building and tell whether it's teaching and learning going on. We can walk in a building and tell if there's love going throughout those halls. We can walk in a building and tell whether or not the teachers would stay after school and they won't be the first ones out the parking lot. So we can tell those things just from our first visit. And like I said, we've been kicked out of more schools than we've actually had relationships with after we gave them the initial assessment.
You know, when Tony talks about kicked out, Georgia Paul, let me give you a very simple analogy. If you had a child, a grandchild, and you sent them to a school, and that school had a whole bunch of fights, kids in the hallways cutting classes all day,
cursing,
teachers yelling and screaming, people late for school, no parent involvement, would you want to send your child to that type of school? Well, the answer is probably no. That's not conducive to learning. So Tony and I go in very simple, and we tell leaders, you might be the problem. And this is why, and this is what's going on. But if you're willing to receive what we're giving you, because we don't know other way but to be transparent with you in that assessment Tony talked about, and here's a roadmap on how to fix it. And that's why Tony said those young principals who want it, most of the time, you look at being proactive or reactive. Sometimes you got to be reactive to a situation, but our preference is to be proactive, and let's change that culture and climate. And I would tell you, educators that want change and want to see success in schools, they buy into our process. But we're very transparent. That's why sometimes people don't want to hear the truth, and maybe we get kicked out of that school because you don't want to face that you might be the problem as a leader.
Well, that's one of the things that we often hear is about failing schools, and we also hear about statistics that rankings in schools. I know here in Atlanta, when you compare schools with other cities around the country, Atlanta public schools don't rank high. So when I listen to what you guys are saying, I mean, to me, it's a humongous task. And when you look at the number of schools that are out there, so let's see if we can kind of drill down on this a little bit. So are the schools that you're more involved in, are they charter schools? Are these public schools? Are these inner city schools? Um, can you kind of give us an idea of some of the interaction and some of the schools that you're dealing with?
It's all the above. It's all the above, George. If a school, most of our work, we do some work with elementary, but most of our work are with middle and high schools. And you're exactly right. It's with those urban schools. It could be a rural school, but essentially, it's fairly easy for us. Word of mouth, people tell them about us. But when you talk about data, you can go to the State Department of Education or the Governor Office of Student Achievement, and it tells you how that school is ranked. That's where a lot of people go to find out whether or not they're buying a new home. They want to move into that district. They're looking at the success of their school, and it's public information. And so, if you have kids that are school age, would you move into a community where you're sending your school to a war zone? And so I hate to call it that, but in some of our schools, there's so much disruption that learning doesn't take place. And so how do we choose? For the most part, people choose us. And they hear about our work through word of mouth, or some assistant superintendent or superintendent say, hey, you need to take a look at these guys. If you really want to change the culture and climate of your school, of your district, you need to contact these guys. And so frankly, we've done very little marketing really in the last probably 10 years of direct marketing in this space. Most of our work comes from referrals.
So you've talked about climate and culture, and I know from our last podcast you talked about the three-legged stool. So give our audience a feel for, say, the top two things that you have found to be successful in seeing a turnaround in schools when you go into them.
Well, for me, George, and I'll start where you have to start. A receptive principal that's ready to do the work, and they don't mind criticism, and they're okay with you saying, hey, what happened? I saw you walk by that student right there, didn't nobody say nothing. That's part of coaching climate. So when you got a principal, when you got that top dog that says we're going to get this right before we look at math, science, social studies, English, any of that curriculum stuff, we want to make sure we have what we call the right coaching climate. So for me, the number one thing would be that right principle. Once you got that principle in place, now let's look at who do you have on your team? Who's on your staff? Once you start talking about this coaching climate thing, some people you have to figure out who's the weakest link. Some people may not be buying into where you're trying to take this school. Some people may be in thinking. They might not understand some of the new terminology around culture and climate, and even the three-legged stool, making sure in order that you're going to have success in that school, you got to have that student that you're concentrating on making sure they know why they're coming to school every day. You got to have that educator that also understands that I'm creating an environment that will make this kid want to come to school every day. And you got to have that parent that supports everything that goes on in that school. So when you look at that three-legged stool, the one that makes the most difference, the biggest difference for me is going to be that leader. It's always that principal. It's that superintendent, or it's that person that's at the top that says, we're doing this because we got to get culture and climate right before we start working on anything else.
So do you actually offer classes to, say, the staff on how to improve the schools? Is that how your process works? So, once you do your assessment, then you pull all the administrators into a room and you become the instructors, and you basically lay it out to them and say, okay, these are the kind of things that we need to do, and then hold them accountable for making these particular changes?
George, you're trying to make it sound like this work not rocket science, because now you just walk through exactly what it is that we do.
Okay.
But
Okay.
George, it's not just the training part. You said teaching, but it's the training part. But with that, we don't give you something and walk away. We walk along with you along that journey. And so it's not a one time, here you go implement. We actually hand carry, walk you through, come back every month, however, or every 3 months, whatever that time period, more training, more assessment, more direct work with them. So it's not one of those, here's a program, go and implement. We're actually guiding, coaching virtually on the ground, coaching principles. So I don't want to forget that coaching part because it's not,
Hmm.
here it is coaching along the way, which is an extremely critical part of this.
Now, you mentioned the different classes in terms of whether you're dealing with high school versus grade school. Which areas do you have more success in, if you will?
Well, success is relative when you're looking at, because the toughest thing for us is to get data back from schools after we've started the process, because data moves so slow in education. Numbers from the testing, and they look at test scores. That's what schools are measured by more than anything. So when you look at the impact of culture and climate, and how it actually controls those numbers, it's hard to get those numbers back, because the people don't want to say that it was just this work that caused that change. It was just this process that caused that change. They want to talk about all the other things that they bringing into the school that add to it, but we claim the credit for the successes. So when you look at that, we'd have to go look at the school. We'd have to go look at what they wanted to concentrate on. Say, for instance, one of the schools wanted to look at reading and math, but they said in order for us to get there, we got to fix the culture and climate right. So our success monitors would be them reading and math scores that next year, but most of the time they don't come out till maybe almost the end of the following year. So
So do
so
you
our,
find
But
so do you find that you have more success with high schoolers versus grade schoolers?
I think the way
How do you look at that?
Paul, I think the way you look at that is sometimes when you look at student outcomes, people tend to look at graduation rates and things of that nature. But for us, when you think about student or who's going to college, well, a middle school kid can't go to college if he's in the sixth grade or graduate for 6 more years. And so some principals may look at attendance. That's a measurement. We want to focus on attendance. That's a part of culture and climate. Some want to look at behavior. That's a part of culture and climate. Some want to look at teacher engagement, fights, and all those other culture. Those things are byproduct. I'll give you a football analogy since I'm a huge football Falcons fan. I would tell you, no one knows who all the offensive linemen are for the Kansas City Chiefs, but for the Atlanta Falcons. But they definitely know who that quarterback is. So if you don't have that culture and climate as an offensive line blocking for you, no one knows the names. But if they're sorry and they can't get the job done, then you're going to get sacked. It's no different than a classroom. And so when you look at culture and climate, our work, the principal's going to get all the credit, the teachers, etc. But that culture and climate is that foundation to help create that culture and climate. So we get the after effect of the results, unless a principal say, I want to focus on behavior, I want to focus on attendance, I want to focus on those things that feed into a culture and climate, then we can measure those student outcomes and we can show data from the beginning. You had this many fights in this school year. Look what happened on a monthly basis. Or you had this attendance. Look what's happening. You had this lack of parent engagement. Look what's happening. But we tend to, when you say results, Paul, most people do exactly what you're doing. You're thinking about, did we improve math, English, science, social studies score? Did you improve graduation rate? Those are the outcomes, but you got to have some inputs to cause those things to happen. And that doesn't happen overnight. That's the process.
And I like that analogy. I'm sorry about your team affiliation, but I do like that analogy. So let
I
me
knew
ask
that
you
was
this.
gonna fly to the radar.
Let me ask you this. So okay, you guys go into a school, you find out what some of the problems and issues are at that school. So let's talk about the fixes. Do you guys have some ancillary services from other areas that you bring in to help alleviate some of the problems that you find in your assessments, such as
Well,
doctors, psychologists, sociologists, that type of thing?
for our work, Paul, we do most of the training ourselves. We have people on our team that have been in principalships. We have people in our team that have served as counselors, as psychologists, and they're what we call seasoned. Some have retired and some have moved on to other things, but they work with us as consultants. So as needed, we bring them in to cover some of those issues around whatever it is that we're attacking. Say, for instance, if we're looking at a situation where somebody's really, really, really dealing with a lot of discipline problems, we don't tell them we're the gurus. We bring somebody in that's figured out what happens with the discipline. We nail down where the discipline problems are actually happening. So it may not be discipline problem, it may be lack of coverage. And kids got places to go to have those discipline problems. So it's not so much that we bring our expert in, but now we've identified, hey, let's look at your data. And we noticed that in your discipline data, most of your fights are happening in the cafeteria. Even better, it's happening during this particular lunch. So now we got that information, and now we're putting saying, you probably need to look at your standard operating procedures around what's happening in your cafeteria during a lunch, because and it down to that last degree in order to make that happen. But as far as bringing people in, we go to the experts. If it's an area that we don't know about, we go out and get people from our consulting team, and they'll come in and help with that training in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting it now. In fact, it's interesting. I had the experience today that kind of fits into what you guys are doing. I was invited to a breakfast, biscuits with the grandparents this morning with my 8-year-old at her new school, charter school. And after I was, talking to her dad, and he was telling me how she was happier going to this particular school, and how he was saying that the other school, which is a charter school also, it seemed like they were walking on eggshells and they weren't really allowing the kids to blossom. But I noticed, and even her, I mean, she's a real bubbly kid. I noticed that, her whole disposition and it has changed since she's went to this new school. So I can see how a program like yours would definitely be beneficial. And I want our audience to make sure that they understand that it's not just, misbehavior that, you guys are dealing with. That's often, when we talk about underperforming schools, that's the first thing we want to point at, like you said, the fights in the cafeteria and things like that. But when you talk about culture and climate, it's creating a environment where the kids are happy to learn, where you're putting things in front of them, why is this a butterfly, and what makes this a butterfly, change colors, and, science, those kind of things. We need to continue to push, especially in our Black schools. We need to make sure that we're getting a well-rounded education, because, and I'm not picking on one thing. Sometimes when we have a Black charter school, they want to be so Black that they miss, the point of learning and the point of making it fun. Okay. And I think sometimes you need somebody from the outside to come in and say, what you're doing is not wrong. What you're doing is actually right. But in order to get the effect of final learning and getting these kids to be in a position where they are happy coming here, you need to do X, Y, and Z, to make this environment more conducive to what you're trying to present them. Make learning fun. I guess that's the easiest way to say it.
Well, but you know what you said, though, George? I want to just say one little point on that. And you brought it out earlier. You don't know, you just backed into our work again. Again, you and Paul.
You can hire me, guys, if you want to.
Let me tell you what you just said.
Ready to go.
We obviously have our own podcast. And what we talk about on the podcast, our work is around a three-legged stool. And George, you just talked about the three-legged stool. You said your granddaughter's dad. Why is he there? He's the parent. So that's one part of the stool, the role of the parents. We also have a tool, as Paul mentioned, for parents on how you need to create a high-performing culture and climate in your home. We have a resource, that auxiliary tool we have that. The second part of that is, how do we help schools create a high-performing culture and climate in the school and in the classroom? That's the second leg of the stool. And then the third leg of that stool is something we have another tool, and that is, how do we get young people turned on to living so they can get turned on to learning? If I don't know my purpose of school, I don't know where I'm going, how I'm going to get there in that roadmap, then why am I going to school? I'll value school more when I get that, and I'm having that college-going culture, a college-going conversation with young people. So thus the three-legged stool you just talked about in the case of your granddaughter, in the case of her father, and then you talked about that school. That's the work. How do we create that high-performing culture climate for those three-legged stools?
So now, it's interesting to me that we're throwing around the term DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there are four principles to this concept of DEI. And it just so happens that you brothers are talking mostly about the fourth pillar of DEI, which is culture and climate. What are some of the other things that you incorporate, and how important is diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to education? Reggie?
Well, I'm going to take this and I'm going to be very, very transparent. How important is diversity, equity, and inclusion? That's kind of like having a conversation around integration to me. And what I mean by that is, Tony and I listened to Harry Belafonte, something that came out probably 40, 50 years ago, and it was something he talked about, and I don't think we can hear Tony, guys, but I'm going to just keep going. I think for us, he talked about, prior to Dr. King passing, 5 days before he passed, Dr. King talked about, essentially I'm surmising that maybe we're about to go into something where, and I'm surmising where the house is on fire over here, and maybe the country is not morally right to get us there. And so to be part of that. And so when you ask me about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it kind of feels like integration, that we're trying to be part of something that's existing. And I think we've been trying that for 400 years. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be part of diversity, equity, but when you have a situation where the most powerful person in the world signs an executive order saying within the federal government there is no more diversity, equity, and inclusion, then that tells you something, that everything is going to be based on merit. Well, you can't legislate people to want to do the right thing. They have to morally want to do the right thing. And so I have a challenge with that. In concept, that's great. We've allowed so many others to take words like woke and DEI to sound like a bad thing. Well,
Right.
it shouldn't be.
Right.
The country and the culture that we live in, I'm all about inclusion. But others about inclusion. And if you're saying that there will be no more, and we're going to get rid of people who are in positions within the federal government, then it becomes problematic. So I want to start there. That didn't answer your question directly, Paul, but I want to give you that as a basis to how we're wired, and that we have to create our own. We have to create our own. We have to teach our own. We have to create our own business. I'm not saying create a separate country. What I am saying is we need to build our own community and not have an expectation that somebody is going to give us 10%, 15% of inclusion. Someone's going to bring us in based on what should be on merit, and do the right thing. Again, you can't legislate people morals. You can't legislate people asking them to do the right thing. And that's where I draw the limit in terms of creating our own wealth, in terms of creating our own, teaching our own kids, parents' responsibility to teach your own child how to read as opposed to expecting someone else. So I answered that in an indirect way, Paul, but that's just how Tony and I look at it when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It sounds good, but you're not going to morally legislate people to want to do the right thing, and we can see what's happening. Yeah, we can say merits, but that's not what's happening.
So when are you running for office, Reggie? That was quite a political answer you had there.
It wasn't meant to be. I can tell you that it wasn't meant to be, Paul. But I listen to. I mean, I'm all about people doing right, but I'm at the end of the day. George went to that school this morning. George, I think it was your granddaughter you mentioned. George went to that school because he is interested in the well-being of his grandchild. Her father was there. In other words, they're creating their own to make sure that their own are doing the right thing. And I have to create it in my home, and then I have to go out to those who may not have a George in their life to help do that as well. Much is given, again, much is required. And we can no longer expect others to do it for us. No one has done it for us for 400 years. So what's the expectation that is going to happen right now? And I'm not talking about something radical. I'm talking about what others are doing. Why shouldn't we be doing it for ourselves?
But it is radical, and I couldn't agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly, because when you're under a system of oppression, why do you think your oppressor is going to teach you anything to overtake his oppression? So as a result of that, we have to formulate our own schools. We have to come up with programs that include and give recognition to ourselves, our worth, and our gifts. And oppressors aren't going to do that. And that's why you guys' work is so important to us.
It's so interesting. And Tony, Tony, are you back with us?
I am, I think. Y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
It's so interesting you would say that, Paul and George. I just want to say there are two things that Tony and I are focused on. When we look at, and you're talking about building community, not a country, but a building a community. There are so many communities within a country. Other people are doing it. You can look at it. And so when I'm talking about people that look like me, people that are like, why is it? Everybody else is doing it for themselves. So why shouldn't we have these kind of candid conversations? And our work takes us on two focus. One, I mentioned about reading. It's so interesting that in some, the state has a bill called House Bill 538 and Senate Bill 212. And what both of those bills say within the state of Georgia is that all students will be reading on grade level by the third grade. Well, that doesn't seem too difficult on the surface. But when you go and draw down the data, we know in some of our schools, in Atlanta, in the Atlanta community, the 13 counties, we know in some schools, some of our kids are not reading. 70 to 75% of our kids are not reading in elementary school on grade level. If you can't read, then curriculum keeps getting more difficult. But if you can't read, and so when you start thinking about that sounds good from a legislative standpoint. But principals can't do it alone. Parents have a responsibility. How do we? So one thing that we're focused on, besides culture and climate, we're also focused on this reading of our Black boys. Because I'm just going to call the elephant in the room. It's majority of our Black boys who are not reading on grade level. And then the second part of that is how do we get more Black men involved in that? And Tony and I on our next podcast are going to talk about this new initiative, this nonprofit we have, focused on reading. I'll let Tony take that from there since he's back on. And then the last thing I want to talk about, Paul, when you talk about building that community, that is economically. We must understand money. You cannot, in a capitalist world, be part of a part of a country, and not understand how money works in a country. And if you don't, you're going to be relegated to being poor and being the underclass forever, never, never. Amen.
Tony, you have any last words before we close this session?
Oh man, wow, we getting ready to close out as time flies. Yeah, not absent, not absent right here. That's a nonprofit that we're starting around identifying Black men that we're going to take into schools, so our young men can see men reading, bragging about reading, showing them how fun it is to read, what they can read. But if we wanted to be a heavy presence of Black men from all walks of life. We don't care where you came from. As long as you like reading, we'll teach you the roadmap to working with these young men. But the name of it is because they think we're absent. Not absent, we're right here. So we'll be working on that. More to come on that. We're happy and excited about starting this whole initiative. Everybody that we're working with, they're saying that this is one of the best things that they think that we can actually do for our young men to make sure that they read. And we're very direct in saying this is a program that we're putting together for Black boys. So more to come. Happy about it. We want to say thank you all for inviting us on again. Actually being the inspiration for us going ahead and jumping out there and start doing our podcast just as well. So we're excited about where we're going with that, and we thank you all. And hopefully, in the very near future, we'll be able to invite you on that to be on our podcast just as well. You got to put on some clothes though, because we always is a video as well. So Paul, I've seen you dress up, and I'm pretty sure if you hang out with George, I know y'all. You know, we like to let people see Black men looking good.
We're from Detroit, brother.
What you say, George?
First of all, we're from Detroit.
There you go.
Man, go ahead. Hey, Reggie Watkins, where are y'all now?
It don't matter, man. We still got
Detroit comes with us wherever we're at.
You ain't got to worry about that part of it. But you know, I mean, it only helps us to help you. So please give our audience the name of your podcast so that they can listen in. And yes, we would definitely love to come on your podcast, because I mean, hear it again.
Absolutely.
It's about us helping each other in spreading the word, because we're talking about the same thing in the concept. Okay. And it's like you said, it's educating, it's creating a culture, and it's creating what we need to do to survive, not only survive, but to move forward in this world, in this country. And when you're talking about literacy, reading, absolutely. And then financial literacy, absolutely. I mean, because that's what's going to help us grow. Because as you look at things, it's becoming a class type of a situation. Not necessarily black and white. It's class. There's those that have it and those that don't. Okay, so we have to, because of the fact that we've been able to grow to a certain level financially, we have to go back and share this information as many of those that will listen, so that we can bring them along with us, because the information is out there. It's just a matter of disseminating that information amongst folks, that need it, want it, and just haven't been able to get it. So, but yeah, I agree with you guys 100% in that aspect.
And Tony, if you could you go ahead and put it in the chat so they'll have it? But the name of our podcast, George and Paul, and we're happy. We were on last night with our some of our producers, and we just went over 1 million views of people on the podcast. So we're excited about that. But it's two men on a stool, thus the three-legged stools. Tony and I, thus the analogy, two men on a stool. And Tony's putting it in the chat room for you all to have it. But I just want to say thank you guys so very much. The work you're doing, and it's interesting. I was going to say that you guys were the catalyst for causing us to go ahead and start our own podcast the last 3 or 4 months. So I just want to say thank you for paying it forward.
Absolutely. And we're going to have you guys on again, because we want to get a little bit deeper into this diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of thing, and how you guys are helping to make that happen in our schools and the schools that our children go to. So that's crucial, and we're going to have you guys on again.
All right, PC, you want to close us out with some words of wisdom? You got some pearls for us?
Sure. In keeping with our discussion for today, I found a little ditty here. If each person has natural gifts and innate talents, then the true nature of education must involve the awakening, inviting, and blessing of the inner genius and unique life spirit of each young person.
Mm. Mm.
All right.
Wow. Wow.
And thank you again, guys, for coming. Thank you again for your service.
Thank you
And
for
as we
having us.
always say on the Crotchety Old Men podcast, if you didn't know, now you
Now you
know.
know.
You know.
Take care,
All right.
guys. Be blessed.
Thanks for
Thank
coming,
you all.
brother.
All right. Take care.